So thank you for being here for our issues, our legislators. As you've seen, we're going to be recording everything this evening, except for the practice session at the end. And this is just so that folks who couldn't make it this evening can have this resource as we move forward with our advocacy. So now I'm just going to quickly go over the agenda for tonight's event. After we've done welcoming everyone to the meeting, we're going to give a quick overview of how JFJ conducts legislator meetings, which I know many of you on the call are already familiar with. Then we'll briefly go over the potential legislative campaigns JFJ is going to pursue in the upcoming legislative session. And after these reviews, we'll split off into breakout rooms to discuss why sharing stories in legislator meetings is so important and how to craft effective stories. So there's going to be a room for those who are more familiar with telling stories in these legislator meetings, and then folks who are newer to telling stories in our legislator meetings will stay in the main room, and we'll have two separate tracks going at the same time. After this, we'll give everyone time to start drafting your own stories, to do a little bit of journaling. And finally, we'll give those of you who want an opportunity to share those stories before we close out the event and just get some practice time in small groups. So that's the brief thing. As you can see on the agenda here, that's what we've got coming up tonight. If you're having any troubles with figuring out your district name, your district number, again, please message Eliana with tech support. We can help get that sorted out for sure. All righty. So diving in, we want to review legislator meetings. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and turn things over to Molly, who's going to do a little bit of sharing on that front.
Thanks, Matan. Hi, everyone. I introduced myself in the chat, but I'll introduce myself here as well. I'm Molly Amster. I am the Maryland Policy Director and Baltimore Director for JOFJ. And I'm excited that you're all here. So we did a Legislator 101 training a few weeks ago. And many of you have been to our legislator meetings before, but even if you didn't, we're going to quickly do an overview so you know where the stories that we're workshopping tonight actually fit into the flow of the conversation. And if you were not able to go to that training, we're going to put the link to the recording in the chat. So feel free to take a look at that before the meeting that your district has with your legislators, so that you can be as prepared as possible. Okay, I'm going to quickly share my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay. These meetings are about introducing JFJ to the legislators. There are a lot of new folks who've been elected, so we especially want to make sure that we're establishing relationships with those people. But it's also an opportunity to continue building on the relationships that we already have with legislators. That's organizationally, but also you as their constituents. We want to share our priority issues with them and why they're important to us, which is where your stories come in. And we often are using these meetings to get information from legislators, even if they are unwilling to say that they'll definitely support an issue. The ones who are already usually supportive will say, like, of course I support that. The ones who are more on the fence are not going to say in the meeting, yes, you've convinced me, I'm now all on board. But it is an opportunity for us to educate them, ask questions, get information that we can bring back to our partners, just different advice people have who are supportive, insight about like concerns people might raise or questions that they have, things like that. And we, want to make sure that we're representing our organization well, not arguing with the legislators, being respectful. One thing that some of us, myself included, sometimes slip up with is we have some of us close relationships with a lot of these folks, and we might slip into using their first names because that's what sometimes we do when we speak to them. But we actually really want to be a bit more formal in these meetings and be respectful and use their titles. So for those who are not in office, it'll be like delegate elect, and for those who already are, delegate whoever. Okay, so we start the meetings with just a preparation session. So that's just for JUFJers to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, we're ready, we know who each other are, we make sure everyone has what they need and knows what their role is. Then the legislator shows up. We welcome them. We introduce ourselves, we share some Jewish framing, and we do a quick intro about JUFJ. We're going to ask here about this is last year's agenda, I should say. We're going to ask, before we get into the issue questions, a question about hybrid meetings, which you don't need to really worry about for the moment. And then we're going to go through the issue areas for the specific campaigns that we are focused on primarily this session. So for each issue area, a JFJ will share a story about why you, or the person speaking, cares about the issue that they're talking about. So for example, in this meeting, court and prison reform, Sam Blau talked really quickly, 1 minute story about why this issue was important to her, and then asked a question that we set up in advance for her particular legislator. And in this instance, it was directed to Delegate Klippinger, who is the chair of the committee that the bill she was talking about goes to. So that's why we asked him specifically. Sometimes we aren't asking all of the questions to all the legislators. It just really depends on what's relevant for each of them given their committee assignments, a lot of which we don't have right now because there's a lot of new people, and new committee assignments have not been announced yet. So we have some information, and we will set these meetings up to the best of our ability with the information that we have. Let's see. At the end of the section, we usually ask, depending on who it is, if they support it, if they have questions, asking for analysis, like we already talked about. And then at the end, so we go through each of these, and different legislators are asked different questions by different JUFJers. So you can see different people's names here who took different questions. And then at the end, we ask the legislators to share their priorities for the session. And before the legislators leave, we make sure we take a quick photo, and then have a debrief when the legislators hop off, so that we can kind of together think about, what did we learn? We take detailed notes about what went well, what we could do better next time, what information we heard, what follow-up we need to do. And so, we make sure we try to take as much from those meetings to really impact the work that we're doing. We share information with our partners about what we learned. And we also, take the feedback and try to do better next time and strengthen each interaction with the legislators. So as in past years, we created a folder for each district where we are having a pre-legislator session, a pre-session legislator meeting. It includes a bunch of different materials to help you prepare for the meeting. One-pagers about the legislators, a spreadsheet with the vote history of your legislators from last year, where applicable, and our notes from last year's pre-session meetings, so that you can kind of see how those went and maybe what they said about the issues that we are talking about again this year. So later we will share a link to those folders so you can take some time afterward to go through them and let us know if you have questions. And we also do a review of all the materials in that folder on the Legislator Meetings 101 video, which maybe Matan and Eliana can post one more time in the chat before we move on. And then Matan and Eliana are going to review our agenda for this session, and we can go on from there to prepare stories about those issues.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen again over here. So firstly, thank you to everyone who's been involved in providing input on these priorities throughout the legislative agenda setting process, especially the members of the Maryland core team and others who have spent a lot of time thinking through these issues, providing input, and also getting feedback from partners. And that includes everyone who participated in our kickoff. So this is always a very challenging process because there are so many important issues to work on and so many important issues that we all care about. But we believe we're now in a strong position as we head towards the 2023 legislative session to work on some critical priorities alongside our partners and through their leadership. So we're gonna just quickly go through these. I know that it will feel pretty brief, but we'll be following up with more one-pagers that go into more detail on these issues so that you can spend time reading and getting updated. And also, I hope that many of these issues are not new to you if you've been involved in our process so far this year. So this year, as with last year, we're going to be focusing on 5 main issue areas. As you can see here on the screen: renters' rights, labor justice, immigrant rights, transforming public safety, and court and prison reform. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll be sharing the issue one-pagers with you shortly, which go into a bit more detail. So for now, we're just going to do a quick review. And I'm going to kick things off with renters' rights. So we're continuing to work with Renters United Maryland, statewide coalition of tenants, service providers, advocates, and others to advance housing justice at the state level. We're going to be working on 2 key priorities with RUM this year. And we're just in the final stages of getting to be absolutely clear what the second issue is going to be. So just keep an eye out for that information coming to you probably this week. And so the first one that we are certain about is emergency rental assistance. So we'll be advocating for legislation that will keep people housed by maintaining pandemic levels of rental assistance, which we know has been critical in preventing evictions, keeping people housed, and keeping people safe. So we'll talk more about that. The next is labor justice. We're going to be continuing our work with the Time to Care Coalition this year to ensure that Maryland establishes a strong paid family and medical leave program for all workers. As you all know, we passed the legislation last year, and now it's about implementation. And there are some key things that we want to fight for to make sure that we establish the strongest possible program in our state, especially for low-income workers. For the next section, I'm actually going to pause and turn it over to Eliana, who's going to walk us through the next 3.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eliana. I use the She series, and I am really excited to be with all of you tonight. So for immigrant rights, we continue to work with CASA and their network of allies, who continues to be one of our closest partners, both at the state level and the local levels, especially on immigration. So following their lead, we will be advocating for 1 priority bill this year in this issue area. You can see on the slide the Affordable Care Act inclusion. This legislation will open up the Maryland Healthcare Exchange to all Marylanders, regardless of immigration status. For transforming public safety, which will be on the screen now, as we fight for police accountability and a true transformation in the way that Maryland approaches public safety, we continue to participate in and follow the lead of the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability, MCJPA. There are 2 bills we're going to be working on with the coalition this year. The first is around independent investigatory powers for police accountability boards, or PABs. So we and MCJPA will be advocating for enabling legislation that will allow local jurisdictions to give their PABs, their police accountability boards, the authority to hire independent investigators to investigate misconduct complaints. We'll also be working to reduce unnecessary police interactions through banning odor searches. So this would prohibit the police from using the odor of cannabis as a basis to stop individuals and perform a warrantless search. And last, but certainly not least, in court and prison reform, this year, with the leadership of partners in the Maryland Youth Justice Coalition, we'll be advocating for legislation to end the practice of automatically charging youth as adults, also known as auto charge. So auto charging is an incredibly harmful practice that further criminalizes children and results in many young people being incarcerated in adult facilities with fewer resources than they would have access to in the juvenile system, including education. So I am going to pass it back to Matan.
All right, thank you. I know we went through that quickly. I'm sure there are plenty of questions about the details of these campaigns, and we will definitely have plenty of time to get into that in future meetings, and especially after we share out the more detailed one-pagers. So definitely look forward to having those conversations. For now, we are going to shift a little bit and head into storytelling workshops. So this is going to be for about the next 20 minutes. As I mentioned earlier, there's going to be 2 tracks, one for folks who are new to telling stories in legislator meetings with JUFJ or want a refresher, and another track for people who have told a story in a JUFJ legislator meeting last year. And we're going to dive into a little bit of some deeper stuff there, building on those experiences.
So hello again, everybody. I am still Eliana, and I am still really excited to be with all of you and to dig into what do we mean by stories in this context? Why do we tell them? And how will we be telling them? So sharing a personal narrative or a personal connection to an issue is one of the most powerful and effective tools at our disposal. When we talk about the issues that we're facing in Maryland, and you just heard about some of them, right? Whether it's over-policing, looming evictions, implementing strong programs like paid family medical leave, many, many more. I know I personally, and I think many others, feel a real tendency to reach for statistics, right? When I'm talking to people in my life about the issues, I really want them to understand the size and scope of the problem, right? That it's like a big deal, that it's urgent, that it's affecting lots of people. So I personally have a tendency to reach for like, did you know that millions of Marylanders are impacted? Or did you know that X percentage of children are sent to adult court, or whatever it may be? But when I think back to lectures, protests, events that I've attended, the things that actually stick with me and like hit me emotionally are not the statistics, even though they are important, right? We want to be educated. It's the stories, it's the personal connections. It's like why people are showing up in the room to be making change. So as we'll talk about a lot more in this training, a story will always communicate, motivate, connect better than dry impersonal facts or a blunt demand for action. And we'll talk more about how we use stories and why they work later in this training. A story, a public narrative, in this case, a personal connection to an issue, right, isn't just any old story that we're blurting out or adding as an afterthought within these legislator meetings. It's really intentional. It's a way of thinking about and telling our stories that motivates other people to act. And at risk of stating the obvious, motivating people to act is really core to what JUFJ does, right? As we carry out our campaigns with our partners, some of whom you just heard about, we and our partners are always using stories to move people. And these stories are especially important in a meeting with our legislators, right? For many of them, they have plenty of policy experts and lobbyists who are telling them all the numbers, who are telling them the statistics. And also, especially during COVID, a lot of how they are interacting with these bills, with these issues, is as Zoom boxes and as just text, lots of words on a screen. So it is really crucial, it's really imperative that they are connecting these issues to real people and their lives, right? They're seeing how a bill can translate to the lived experiences of their constituents, right? Us, people that live in Maryland. I'm going to talk a little bit about why do we tell stories. So as you'll see in this slide, stories have the capacity to do a bunch of different things, right? They can disrupt stereotypes. They can elicit other stories. They absolutely demonstrate vulnerability. But I want to pull out those last two bullet points on the page in particular. Stories demonstrate values. So people might say their values really explicitly and clearly, like somebody might say, I want to work for progressive political change. But that statement means a lot more when we tell stories that illustrate that value, right? Why do you want to work for progressive political change? What does progressive political change even mean to you? So stories also inspire others to act. Stories help us build a movement that's based on shared experiences and interests and inspire people to act based on those interests and experiences. And in this case, for legislator meetings, our goal is to inspire our legislators to act in particular ways, right? For legislators on key committees, we want them to vote for and be champions of our bills. And for any legislator, regardless of their leadership position, regardless of what committee they're on, we ultimately want them to vote with us and to work behind the scenes to move our bills forward. So the top line takeaway here is that we as human beings experience our values as our emotions, our motivations to action. And because stories are a way to share those values as lived experiences, not the abstract principles like floating in the ether, they can really effectively move others, like our legislators, to action with us. So when we are telling stories to our friends or our family or our neighbors, they are often fluid and disorganized and jump all over the place without an overriding framework, right? When I'm telling my friends about my day, I might be talking about how I sat down at the computer to work, and then my cat jumped on my lap, and now I'm telling a story about everything that my cat did. And then 20 minutes later, I'm back and I'm talking about my day. So I'm curious, folks can raise your hand. If you have friends who tell stories like this, I'm going to raise my hand because I am the person that tells stories in that way. I'm seeing a couple of hands. I'm seeing some nods. Yeah, it is totally, totally natural, right? That's absolutely how I tell stories in my everyday life. And when we're telling our stories to state leaders, when we're trying to move them to take action around pressing issues, those are not the stories that we want to be telling, right? As you can see on the slide, we want our stories to be two things. We want them to be concise and intentional, right? Within the legislator meeting, we have a limited amount of time with our representatives. So we want to be making sure that we're maximizing the time that we do have. You heard at the beginning, we have a lot of issue areas that we're going to try to be hitting on in these legislator meetings. So for that reason, the stories that we'll craft and begin practicing today will be approximately 1 minute long, which might be long, it might be short, but that's what it is. It's going to be 1 minute. And by intentional, I mean that the stories that we're sharing are not the off the cuff, how was your day? Now I'm talking about a lot of things as they come to mind, but they're thoughtful and they're prepared in advance. And that piece of prepared in advance thoughtfulness, that's the purpose of this very training, right? To give you some time and some space to begin thinking about what your story could look like. So we're going to click away from the slides for just a minute, and Joe is going to share an agenda from a legislator meeting last year. There's a sub-bullet point that says question, right? That will be pre-written by JUFJ staff, but above that, you can see that there was space for a personal connection from a JUFJer. So those bullet points that you're seeing on this slide, those first two that Joe is going to highlight right there, is what that JUFJer, Brianna, had written last year to say to her legislators. So your personal story, and we'll talk more about this in just a minute, can be really broad. It can be connected to why you care about labor justice, renters' rights, immigrant justice, court and prison reform, transforming public safety as broad categories, or it can link specifically to one of the bills that JUFJ will be working on in the coming year, right? Why do you care about a strong implementation of paid family and medical leave? What does it mean to you for there to be access to health care for all Marylanders, regardless of their immigration status, et cetera, et cetera? So Joe is going to click us back over to the slides, and I'm going to offer a couple guiding questions that I found are really helpful jumping off points for thinking about your story. So the first is, why is this issue important to you as an individual, right? Maybe you've had a personal experience that motivates you to take action around this issue, or a professional experience. And I want to be clear that when I say personal experience, that doesn't mean there's a big moment in your life where you were directly impacted by the issue, although that might be true for you, right? It could be a conversation that you had with somebody in your life that was really moving, how you felt as you were reading a news story or watching something unfold at the statewide, local, federal level, whatever it may be. And for some of us, that personal experience piece isn't the most resonant. That's not the thing that comes to mind. Something that might be a better starting point for you is that second question. Why is this issue important to you from a values-based lens? So you might think about Jewish values that you hold that connect with an issue area, your family history, something else, right? And if you're not Jewish, if Jewish values are not the thing that like resonates for you, you can broaden that to any set of values, Jewish or not. So we talked a couple of minutes ago about our story needing to be concise, right? 1 minute is not a lot of time. So the story should not be all of the things, right? I suggest you pick one of those questions and focus in on it. And the basic structure of your story could look like, as you can see on the screen, your connection, your personal story related to the bill or the issue, naming the need for legislators to take action, and mentioning JUFJ's coalition partners. And we on staff will make sure you know who those partners are. And then a transition to asking the question about that issue area, about the bill. So I am going to pass it to Joe to model a story, and then I'm going to pull out some threads from that story for us to learn from together.
Hello again. So yeah, I'm going to share a story that's connected. It's going to bring a personal connection to our access to Medicaid potential campaign that we reviewed earlier on in the call. So this is the story that, an example of the story that I would give to a legislator in a legislator meeting. When I turned 13, as many Jews do, I had the honor of reciting a Torah portion before my synagogue as part of my bar mitzvah. My portion, Ki Tetzeh, describes many commandments the Israelites must follow. One of those commandments is to love the stranger in your community as yourself. This commandment forms a deeply held value that I carry with me to this day. With this in mind, I look to my own Maryland community and am saddened to see that we are not living up to this value. Undocumented immigrants in Maryland are denied access to Medicaid health benefits, though they contribute to our economy and pay taxes. It angers me that we are discriminating against migrants and not treating them as the vital members of our community, which they are. I ask that you fight for the stranger in our midst by supporting legislation, which our partner CASA is pushing for, which would ensure that all members of our community can access Medicaid benefits regardless of immigration status. So that is the story that I would share. Just to pull out a few threads, I would note that, again, there was that three-part structure. I gave the brief experience or connection to values. In this case, it was my experience as a bar mitzvah, and the values of treating the stranger not as one of your own, stating the need for legislators to take action and mentioning JFJ's coalition partner. In this case, it was CASA, and transition to a concrete ask, which was to support legislation that would grant access to Medicaid benefits for migrants.
Amazing, Joe. Thank you so much. And that, again, is just one example of what a story could look like.
So welcome to our training for returning storytellers. You've all told stories at legislator meetings before or attended last year's Our Issues, Our Legislators training. So this time is going to be, we're going to include a brief recap, some of the key learnings from last year, and introduce some other core storytelling concepts so you can continue building on your skills there. So we're going to be diving in there. Before we go further, though, because you all are so experienced in this, I would love to just open it up and feel free to put this in the chat, or if you want to, you can come off mute and just share if there's anything about key learnings that you've had about why we tell stories, why that's a core part of our advocacy in these legislator meetings. So anything you remember from past JFJ trainings, Our Issues, Our Legislators, or DKO, or from actually being in this legislator meetings, if anyone has anything to throw out there about the importance of storytelling.
So it makes things real and not just scripted, but it personalizes things.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Thank you. I'm also seeing in the chat that stories are memorable, 100%. We still have legislators who come back to some leaders and say, I still remember that story that you told about whatever the issue was, right? Like, we still see that happen when we're in Annapolis and when we're in meetings. Yeah, a personal connection is powerful. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to build these deeper relationships with our legislators, so that we're not just sort of like nameless, faceless constituents. Yeah, Hannah.
Well, just to amplify that, I think it gives them, the legislators, material that they can use.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, especially as they go forward and we're talking with legislators, particularly we've seen that with legislators who support our issues. It gives them more context to go and talk to their colleagues, right? Even if they're not on the committee, they can go to their colleagues and say, not only am I hearing from constituents, let me tell you, I've got some narratives to share about that. Okay, you all are hitting on it. Some other things are stories can help disrupt stereotypes. They can elicit other stories. They can demonstrate vulnerability, right? We're trying to also get legislators to share with us. So it's part of a welcoming that in the relationship. It also, stories demonstrate our values, right? That's really, we're showing that we are values driven, and this helps make those connections real. And they inspire, as you all already touched on, right? The stories inspire others to act. They help us build a movement based on shared experiences and interests, right? So this is also beyond our meetings with legislators, bringing other people in to our work, right? They're finding connections through our stories as well. Yes, they offer perspectives that the legislators may not have experienced. That's 100% accurate. I appreciate that in the chat. And so our goal is to inspire legislators to act in particular ways. For those on key committees, we want them to vote and be champions of our bills. For any legislator, we want them to vote with us and work behind the scenes to move our bills forward, even if they're not on the key committees. We'll get into that a little bit more later on, because that's something we hear from legislators quite often. And so one of the key takeaways here, I think, is that we experience our values as emotions, our motivations to action. And because stories are a way to share those values as lived experiences, not as, some sort of abstract principles, they can effectively move others, like our legislators, to take action with us. So the next thing I want to dive into talking about is reaction goals. So many of you are versed in telling stories, both inside and outside of JFJ legislator meetings. And today we're going to dive deeper into storytelling as an organizing tool and think together about how we bring more intentionality to the stories that we tell. And by intentional, we mean that they are thoughtful and prepared in advance. And one way to introduce more intentionality to your story is to think about your reaction goals. Right? The reaction goal is what you want the listener to walk away from your story feeling, or what emotions you want the story to evoke. So having reaction goals are important because it helps us focus our story in particular direction, driven by who our audience is and our analysis of what they will respond to, right? And for these legislator meetings, we know who our audience is. It's our legislators, right? And we kind of have an advantage there, right? We have targets that we know some background on. Some of us already have relationships with them. We can build from there. And we already know one reaction goal. We want our legislators to be moved to take action, to vote for, and be champions, right? But we're going to go a little bit deeper than that. So 2 questions that we've been working on, right, to ask yourself when creating reaction goals are, 1, what emotion do I want my story to evoke, right? And pick one. Our stories are short, especially in these legislator meetings. We're aiming for 60 to 90 seconds, super brief. So we can only really evoke one emotion. And we want to really focus in on that. And these can be things like anger, sadness, sympathy, hope, right? But really getting specific about that. And what does my audience care about? That's the other question. So I can reach that emotion. This is where relationships that we have with legislators come in handy, right? We often know what our legislators care about beyond the issues that we're talking to them about. We know bills that they've championed. Some of us know them personally through our congregations or through our communities or other organizations that we're involved with. And so pulling on what we know about their background and things that they care about outside of what we're presenting to them. And so there's lots of different ways to think about reaction goals and intentionality. Even though there may be multiple legislators in a meeting, which is often the case, there might be one legislator we really want to target. They're in a leadership position, or they're on a key committee, or can be a champion of a bill. We might have a specific knowledge about a target that allows us to tell a story that really moves them. And so I know I'm talking at you all a lot, but I'm going to share a personal story of mine, and it's my draft at an attempt at this. And then I'm going to open it up for reactions and feedback, and I welcome any feedback as I continue to work on this as well. But I want to tell a story that's trying to get at this piece about showing a connection to an issue that a legislator cares about that's sort of outside of our scope normally, but fits into what we're talking about. And so I'm going to put a timer on because this is one of the things that I'm struggling with is keeping it to 60 to 90 seconds. So one moment while I pull that up. All right, so this is going to be one example, and I'm doing it. I live in District 43. My senator is Senator Mary Washington. And I'm going to be presenting as if I'm talking about paid family and medical leave as part of the legislator meeting. I've chosen her both because she's my senator and because she's a great example of someone who doesn't necessarily sit on a key committee that we're working with on this piece of legislation, but who we want to be involved. We want her to care, and we want her to work behind the scenes to move her colleagues to action to support the bill to strengthen implementation, right? And I think that's something that, again, we hear a lot from legislators who will say, oh, yeah, of course I care about this issue, but I don't sit on the committee, so we can skip this part. You should go talk to the committee members. Of course we know that. We're well versed in this, but that's not the point. We want them to see their responsibility in taking action as well. So hello, my name is Matan Zemmer. You see him, his pronouns. I'm with Jews United for Justice. Tonight, I really want to talk to you about paid family and medical leave. I have a deep personal connection to this issue beyond having worked on it for a while. My niece, one of my nieces actually just turned 6. Her name is Faith. And about 5 years ago, she joined our family through the foster care system. And it's been an amazing experience of welcoming her into our family. She's a critical person in my life. She's a ray of sunshine, and she brings so much joy to me. But it's been a really hard process watching my brother and my sister-in-law go through and navigate the foster care system, mostly because it's an extremely arduous process It takes a lot of time, and it's around this really sensitive process of welcoming a new child into the family, and also trying to welcome her birth mother into the family as well as they navigate those dynamics. And it's required a lot of their time and a lot of their energy, and it's gone well beyond the amount of time that they have paid off from work. And so it's been challenging for them and to watch them have to navigate making decisions between being able to go to work and get the income they need to support their family, and also to show up for faith and show up for that process to make sure that it's a complete process and a welcoming process and one that is not burdensome on her to welcome her into our family. And so I know that with a strong implementation of paid family medical leave in Maryland, we can ensure that families, whether they're welcoming a new child through birth, adoption, foster care, or dealing with any other health or sickness where they need to care for themselves or their loved ones, that they can have this critical time needed and they don't have to make these hard choices between being there for their family members in critical moments and getting the income they need to survive and thrive. So I hope with that, and with your history of working on foster care issues in previous years and this whole delegation supporting you in that, I hope you, Senator Washington, will be a champion of pushing this legislation behind the scenes. All right, that was way longer than a minute and a half, but it was under 2 minutes, so I'm working on it, and I appreciate you all listening to that. But I also just want to acknowledge that we might not have the deep knowledge about a legislator target or have a legislator we're targeting, so we can lean into evoking an emotion, which is an equally valuable part of reaction goals, focusing on the feeling that you want legislators to feel as they walk away. And hone your narrative around that, right? If we don't have these connections to the specific legislators. Great. So as you think about the story that you want to tell and the personal connection you have to an issue area, we wanted to remind you of the guiding questions and story structure. So the first is, why is this issue important to you as an individual? Maybe you've had a personal experience that motivates you to take action around this issue. And second is, why is the issue important to you from a values-based lens, right? You might think about Jewish values you hold that connect you with an issue area, your family history, or something else where you derive your values from. And if you're not Jewish or just or those don't resonate with you, you can just broaden this to any values, Jewish or not. And so with that, I just want to jump here. I'm just going to share my screen again real quick. Right, so these are the two main questions that we're sort of thinking about as we're crafting our story. And the story structure, right? Like, this is the basic story structure that I think all of you are already familiar with from doing this before. But it's about your connection to the issue or bill, naming the need for legislators to take action, and mentioning JOFJ's coalition partners, which is really critical. We want all of our legislators to know, as part of what we're sharing with them, which coalitions we're working with, and transitioned to asking the questions that will be in the script or in the agenda that we give. So that is the brief outline. I stop sharing so I can see your faces again. So we're going to be going. Oh yeah, Louise, I see your hand. Sorry, I didn't see you.
A question related to, this is the first time in my experience that we're going to be dealing with two issues that legislators might have already, they will have think that it's over and done with. That's paid family leave, and it's also the women's release program. And so the question is, like, in terms of the questions, it's like how to educate them up that we just don't drop once a law is passed, drop an issue once a law is passed, right. To actually have to monitor and actually win, like keeping it strong and whole as the legislation was intended.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really important point. I'll say for paid family medical leave, I think that in particular, continuing to tell personal stories is what's going to help elevate the urgency of people to say, oh, this isn't something we just did in the past and now I don't need to worry about it, right? We need them to know that the urgency is almost even greater now that we got the initial bill passed, because we know that it's where the rubber hits the road with implementation. If we don't get that right, especially in the next 2 years where they're setting up the program, then we're, setting ourselves up for years of trying to go back and fix things. And we were really working hard to avoid that, especially based on the experiences we've seen from other states, and learning from all those experiences and saying we actually have the opportunity to get it right now. But telling them the why, these stories. And so I think that's true for all of those around implementation. And it can be part of our story, of our values, of sticking with it, right? It's the saying we have on the back of all of our shirts, right? We have to continue this work. We might not see the end of it, but it's on us to continue to push for it. And that's also true for our legislators. So I don't know if that's direct. Great. Yeah. So I think that would be my take on that. Great. So we're going to be going back to the main room to journal a little bit about our own personal stories. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms to practice our stories, just as we've done, as I did with you all, and got some feedback. All right. I see that the room is closing, so feel free to go back to the main room, and I'll meet you there in just a minute.